here. There are going to be 6 presenters, and each one of them is supposed to present 15 slides over 5 minutes. So the slides have been timed, so the slides will be moving automatically. So as the presenter is presenting, if they are not following the slides will be moving. When you get to them, you are done. But the important thing for us, the audience, is at the end of this, we are going to select the best Pecha Kucha presenter. So please just be on the lookout so that you see who is best. There is no criteria. You just choose whoever you think is the best Pecha Kucha presenter. So at the end of this, there is going to be a QR code which is going to be shown here so that we can vote. We have already voted for the other QR code that was screened here. So when the presenters come here, when you are ready, you simply say start. Once you say start, then the AV specialists who are there are going to start moving your slides. So you only say start when you feel you are ready. You feel your heart is no longer beating. Okay? So now we are going to move straight to our first presenter, who is Ivan Meidika Kurnia, who is a health policy advisor for the Indonesia and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the UK. And Ivan is going to talk on Gotong Royong for global health, building equitable research partnerships through collective solidarity. Please.
That's may I say start? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivan. I'm a medical doctor by training, now working full-time, as been introduced. And today I'm going to share my thoughts and proposals on Gotong Royong, a collective solidarity value from Indonesia. And Indonesia shared its quote-unquote resources only to be informed later that the commercialized product has a price tag. So we decided to stop. And our decision may invite criticism, but it has led to the creation of pandemic influenza preparedness framework, which has shifted the power dynamics in influenza. In 2017, Adi Utarini managed to convince hundreds of thousands of people to release swarms of Wolbachia technology mosquitoes in their neighborhood. And as a result, dengue cases dropped and hospitalization rate dropped 90%. And she was named one of the Time 100 most influential people on planet at that year. And so partnership is not neutral. The response arguably only addressed symptoms such as early inclusion, equitable authorship, capacity building toolkits, but it failed to address the deeper structural roots of resource control, data sharing standards, and agenda setting. As you can see from the image on the left, despite neutral prompt using tech that's supposed to be neutral, the result is not neutral. You see how the global south is depicted as colored. See how we need hand-holding as if we cannot show a way forward, and see how they have the technology, the microscope on their side, and we don't. And these imbalances can be understood through several lenses. Foucault might label the mandated data sharing as biopower, as a power exercise over lives, and without economic capital to bargain. Sen and Bourdieu might say that we are left incapable to fight the faceless institutionalized power of IP regime. So Gotong Royong goes beyond the concept of friendship by Aristotle. A mother on the left, or recipient of care in 1 minute, reciprocally helping me to help her neighbors in the next hours. And community health workers on the right volunteer their time and even at their own expense for the success of Indonesia's health programs. However, there are constraints of this value. First, as you have seen with influenza in Indonesia, commercialized output will put a price tag to the reciprocity. On the other hand, the solidarity and voluntarism with no price tag is prone to be exploited in the name of collective benefit. And the third one, Standards and guidelines impose requirements that might go against the Gotong Royong's embedded consensus, restraint, and harmony. And lastly, the state-level protection can drift into biopolitical insulation, where protection becomes domination, and individual choices dissolves under the institution's will. So Gotong Royong flourishes where there is high visibility, high stakes collective threats, such as in outbreaks, factor control, and so solidarity becomes instinctive. But reciprocity must be guaranteed in advance, so collective contribution is met with collective return. These values also thrives in coherence that prioritize harmony over haze, and such restraints builds trust and prevent extractive shortcuts. A true Gotong Royong system should also provide safety net and guardrails to protect the voluntarism and goodwill from structural exploitation. Indonesia's position at this day in the ongoing PAPS negotiation extends this value. Mandatory data sharing must be reciprocal. So we built consensus with like-minded countries, which now has 29 developing countries demanding the same thing, a true real-time testament that Gotong Royong is possible. The same value also shapes the national genomics and clinical research ecosystem. We reformed the biopolitical insulation blockers that halt research partnership. So now the states negotiates collective benefits while preserving the individual consent. Once approved, no coercion and no obstruction from the state level. Concludingly, born under colonialism, Gotong Royong reclaims the governance of life from asymmetrical power exercise, offering a tangible ethics. And from the ground level to the global health arena, Gotong Royong guides partnerships that serve and honors the dignity of life. And lastly, I would like to say thank you and extend my gratitude to Adrienne and Sharon for helping out, and all the health workers in the world for your often thankless and invisible services to the society. Thank you, and I look forward to advance this work with you.
Thank you so much, Ivan. So as I mentioned, there are no criteria. You choose. If it is suits, that's fine. So let's move on to our next presentation, which is titled From the Margins to the Center, Reimagining Ethical Research Partnerships Through Nomadic Maternal Health Practices in Somalia. And our presenter is Ahmed with the Ministry of Health Development, Somaliland. So I told him that I'm going to recognize Somaliland today. So over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you so much. My heart is beating, but I just want to start. So can you please start? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Ahmed, and I'm from Somaliland. I think since from yesterday, from the key speak notes until today, the panels, we've been talking about partnership. But the kind of partnership we've been discussing is a partnership between institutions and among institutions and, with institutions. What I'm going to share with you is a partnership between a doctoral researcher and community that is based on kinship, patriarchal society, and cosmological partnership. My doctoral research is on maternal and child health. I've been conducting interviews in a community that's mobile, patriarchal, and kinship-based. I have been struggling with institutional board reviews, government bureaucracy, and patriarchal leaders gatekeeping to get access to women to interview. Being the topic I was discussing, sensitive and being male in a community that has never been seen a male going into the spheres of women. So that I'm sharing some of the ethical dilemmas I have because of this society is oral and consent is negotiated and based on orality rather than written consent. So what you can see here is I'm trying to critique as well as also offer some insight is how we can reach out communities on the margins, that's pastoral nomadic communities, which are which have no written language but are more oral and bioetic, and how I went through the challenges of negotiating consents, going through negotiating with leaders, elders, and trying to satisfy different systems in university, in the government, and also in the community. What I have seen was that kind of ethical system I went through was more relational. For instance, in terms of consent, I have to go through several layers of getting consent from the husband, from the chief, and then from the women. That was the kind of dilemma I had. And again, this society being oral, I had to try to ensure that I am not sharing the stories because I spent 1 year with elders, so every night the elders will come and try to understand what I'm going to do with their women. So it was quite difficult, but sometimes those stories and interviews I had with women have already been shared with their husbands. So those stories will come back to me at the Kamal Khan during the nights. And this is how I have been conducting the interviews. I had to conduct the interviews in an open area without, people hearing, but I have to be seen with the women so that I don't, step on toes. And these are the kind of norms and social sensitivity that I have to stay with and try to respect and try to understand. What I'm suggesting is that I see the fieldwork as a learning, not as compliance and a written, ethical systems, but I have lived with this community, tried to learn the culture, even though I came from that community, but I haven't lived there. So I had to learn how to work. And also one of the other challenges was the storytelling, but because these are oral society, so whatever we discuss is a story in the community. So if we talked about maternal death or a child death, then tomorrow in the morning, you'll find those stories permeating around the community. So maintaining confidentiality and the ethical issues around that was also a challenge for me. So what I'm suggesting is in terms of policy community, I'm saying there has to be community and traditional-led systems in place to help researchers like me to survive and navigate the intricacies of going through those systems. One of the things was projected speeches. When I talk to women, she will not talk about her experience, but she will talk about the experience of neighbors. And that was also a heavy issues for me, because what I was documenting was a lived experience of those women, how they do survive in a lone path, how do they get over the birth of their children, but they always talk about other people's stories. And that was also quite challenging because it wasn't part of my research. Then I had to negotiate with my supervisors how I will deal with this kind of stories. So what I'm concluding with is we need to reimagine partnership in those communities beyond compliance. Finally, thank you so much. And this is Somaliland. This is where I did my conference. And today I've never been so poor of time because 5 minutes is no good time. So thank you so much. But what I'm going to conclude is that marginal communities require systems that work with their ecology and systems. Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, it's just 5 minutes, not negotiable. But you did well, nevertheless. Thank you so much. So from Somaliland, we now move to Kenya. And our next presentation is titled The Unimagined and Unforeseen Impacts of Long-Standing North-South Collaborations on the Research Ecosystems in Host Sub-Saharan African Countries. And our presenter is David Wanjeri. Over to you.
Start. So most of you who come from the Global South and are in North-South partnership may or may not agree with the reflection that I'm going to give today. So the reflection is about the unimagined and unforeseen impacts of long-standing North-South collaborations. And I start by saying that Sub-Saharan Africa is among the major participants in the Global North, Global South partnerships. And the reasons are obvious because of the high burden of disease and all that. And this map shows where the partnerships concentrate. Now, these partnerships have been long-standing. They've been there for over 3 decades, and they have resulted to significant impacts, and they have improved the health for the communities, which is a very key aspect of these collaborations. But as these collaborations continue, we see that one of the issues that we've been discussing since we began is the issue of equity. It's one of the major ethical issue. And here we are talking about the economic disparities between the partners and the unequal distribution of research funds. But even in the Global South, among the Global South, there are specific equity issues, including the different levels at which institutions are in terms of the empowerment. Now, one of the requirements for the empowerment, I mean, for the establishment of the North-South partnership is the alignment of the research system in the Global South with the research system in the Global North. And this is one of the conditions that is there. For example, you know, you have to align with some of the ideas that come from the West. But now, the impact of North-South collaboration is very clear. It leads to the empowerment of the Global South institutions. For example, health facilities, empowerment of researchers, improved health for the communities, and academic programs. But perhaps one of the issues that we don't talk about so much is the impact of the empowerment of some of the institutions in the Global South, region. And one of the things that come up is the inequity within these institutions, especially for the institutions that have not been in this kind of partnerships. It brings about the issue of power imbalance. And one of the ways in which it does is this way. The empowered Global North institutions, they tend to outshine the rest, which are not in any collaborations. And sometimes they also surpass the regulatory standards of the countries because they always use the global standard, the regulatory standards from the Global North. Now, in that case, the dominant Global North empowered African institutions are likely to have a significant influence in the research systems, the extent of influencing national regulatory bodies to adopt the foreign influence yet less relevant health research systems. For example, you'll find that sometimes they come, because they're using systems from a more developed situation, they may reluctantly yield to the directives of the national regulator, thus occasioning inequality in monitoring and accreditation process. More often you'll find that even the accreditation process that the national regulator uses is the one from such kind of empowered institutions. And therefore, what we are saying is this, we need to ensure that we encourage South-South collaborations, because some of these North-South collaborations with institutions that have been empowered, they hamper these kind of collaborations because they dine with the mighty and countries that are already developed, and therefore they don't find any reason to collaborate with the similar institutions within the same countries. However, this exposure is not bad. Sometimes some of these empowered institutions, they appreciate and easily comply with the local health research systems in comparison to the non-collaborative institutions because of their experience and because they also value the importance of collaborating. And therefore, as a recommendation, we say that these North-South health research partnerships should be built on the holistic equity where empowered Global South institutions should extend this empowerment to their counterparts. And also, then these collaborations should commit to respect national research systems in the Global South. Thank you. These are my references, and I wish to thank, where is he? He's here, for the critiques that he offered me throughout this presentation, and he was able to direct me in the right path, and I thank him so much. 15 minutes, isn't it?
Oh, there is my name.
Yeah.
So thank you, David, for thanking me. So that was another way of looking at the impacts of North-South collaboration on the South. Thank you for that different view. We're now going to move to our next presentation, which is titled, My PI Ship Was a Colony, an LMIC investigator's account of systemic betrayal and the need for radical grant restructuring. And our next presenter is Munira from the University of Bergen in Norway.
need radical grant restructuring. The project I talk about was in a rural and remote area of Pakistan. $3.2 million study, preschool education and health grant, and we randomized 100 preschools in 100 villages. On paper, a model of innovation, but in practice, it was hierarchy disguised as collaboration and co-creation disguised as control. So we have made progress. Funders do ask for PIs to be based in LMICs, but the reality is the funds are still based on the influence of the collaborator at high income setting. So while I was made the PI to satisfy that criteria, the financial and operational control can still remain elsewhere. So we hired young women as teachers and we sold the funders that this was innovation, but this is what most preschools are doing anyways in Pakistan. But the greater concern was that these women in 18 to 24 years of age, they are highly manageable, and also they were the first time stepping out of the home, very vulnerable, especially when being managed by male supervisors. And it's not just operational decisions, but the data management units, the grant administration units, the finance department, all of them were in touch with this PI, or the PI was in touch with them. Some of the staff here was also invited to their institutions in a high-income country. Moreover, blue passports and blue accents have a lot of power, and the energy to travel anywhere and everywhere almost, also to the field site, without the knowledge of the local PI and without even aligning with the needs of the project. So this was a leadership strategy that you could bypass local coordination if you were based in a high-income country. More than that, I was labeled as a junior investigator because I lacked credibility, or I suffer from credibility deficit. And the weekly mentorship meeting, which was meant to mentor me, how do I talk to my own government partners that speak my own language from my own culture, or was it feed a narrative? So what happens is, as we discussed in the morning, local teams work unpaid hours, they bear risk unacknowledged, we train, we navigate, we partner, and we do all the stuff on the ground, and while we fund someone else's career chilling in Boston or London. And this can happen because you got one who has the money controls the narrative. You can write the story of who is the savior, who is being saved, what's the story, and who is the expert, and importantly, what is the science that's coming from this world. So, and who holds the funds also decides whose ethics count. So my life was symbolic. I was both the proof of equity as a checkbox, but I was also a prisoner in a golden cage in a premier institute, but at the cost of my own dignity, where I found no way out. And when conscience becomes too dangerous, the easiest thing, you flip the narrative. So my HIC counterpart, when I asked these questions, wrote to my university that my questions were making me an ethical threat, affecting the quality of the project, without any credible evidence. And they could do that because they knew the system much more better than I did. And when you write to your own university, I think this is where I was betrayed the most. Funding replaces ethics, and they silently compliant with the HIC counterparts, all their demands, and I was surveilled. Every email, every WhatsApp, every document was scrutinized, because that's how the system is built. And there's a human cost to it, which I didn't see being mentioned here in the two-day conference and two-day meeting, is the anxiety and the isolation and the fear of losing everything that you've built over the years to be lost just because you ask ethical questions around community. The weight of the consent form, which had my name, was too heavy for me to carry or to sleep at night, so I resigned because I could see the decision of the project were not in the best interest of my community. So I refused to participate, and I still refuse to participate in the erasure of my own values. If we are to change or to shift equity, we need courage as the currency of change, not courage for just to budget changes, but to actually push for accountability to the abuser as much as we push forgiveness on the one who is being abused. Until then, equity is going to remain an illusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munira, for sharing with us your personal experience. said that you got to that point where you had to resign. We are going to move on to our next presentation, which is titled No Samples Without Justice, Lessons from a Malaysian TB Research Partnership. And our presenter is Feng from the University Malaya in Malaysia.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we can start. All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Alex Pang from University Malaya, Malaysia. Today, I would like to share a simple idea: no samples without justice. If the partnership is not fair, the science will not shine, and the people who contribute the samples will not benefit. So today I'm going to share about the story of tuberculosis, but before that, just a brief background about TB. So as we know, TB still affects millions of lives globally, mostly in the lower income countries. So as we can see, the burden is at the global south. Therefore, I think the roles, resources, and authorship should reflect that reality, right? So Malaysia is not the highest burden country, but cases are climbing up again. And that is a warning and also a chance. We need a research partnership that build local capacity and deliver outcomes that matter to our patients and our homeland. So here is a real case from our hospital that spanned over 3 years. So basically, our local researchers partner with the foreign university from high-income country. Our primary role is to collect the samples, the blood and sputum, and send over to the partner in the foreign country to do the design and also the genomic analysis. The agreement, as I mentioned, we have the MTA in place, but the gaps in those papers became very real later on. So what came to our attention later on is that so after years, the local team claimed that they do not have access to the data, especially if in terms of the data secondary data sharing. So the authorship also was unclear because 1 out of the 3 papers published with the local researcher names. So the potential IP also has not been properly settled. So many problems actually sit inside these agreements. As we can see, tempers usually came from the foreign countries' side and were very hard to change. And why agreement fails? It is because of the uneven power and the capacity. And the legal as well as the admin support is still on the local side. And the local researcher always feel afraid to push back because of the risk of losing the funding opportunity. And the system rewards speed more than the fairness, and so fairness becomes optional. So hence, the local researchers often sign the agreement as presented. It was not careless, it was necessary because local patients need help and timelines was tight. As mentioned, saying no will actually put them at the risk of losing the partnership. All right, so however, some good news, as we can see, some MIC actually realize whether whenever the partnership coming in, whether they will consider this is a co-leadership or just assistance. And hopefully this norm will bring up the momentum as well. However, there's some practical steps to work. What actually works, build negotiation skills and proper admin as well as legal support can surely help the local researchers. Co-draft every agreement, turn fairness into tasks with NIM owners, share responsibility from day one, not only at the end of the research and publications. And principles always are good, but must live in the workflow. Embedding enforceable provisions on the data sharing is very crucial. And to achieve this, there are some international guidelines which is very useful, like correct fair research contracting toolkit that they can consider. So also using the clause that really help, for example, spell out clearly the provisions of data sharing and access for fair secondary use. Keep the language clear so that both sides can use it without calling a lawyer in the room every time when small thing happen. So spell out explicitly also the benefit sharing, for example, technology transfer in the agreement, set balance and realistic IP terms and royalties when relevant, create dispute path that the local team can actually use. So it is important to consider the contract should protect collaboration and partnership, not weaken it. So when rules are fair, trust grows. Workflows smoother because people feel respected and inclusive, and eventually each studies fit local realities better. Over time, you will see more MIC-led projects where disease burden is highest. So FINA is not only a nice thing to have, but it's a driver for better science. So here is a main takeaway. Clarity in agreements builds strong partnership. And this strong partnership produces strong science and better outcomes for the patients. All right, so no samples without justice is not a slogan, but it is a way to work together. Thank you so much, and I would like to thank to Sharon for being my mentor, and also Adrian for guiding me for this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing with us your views and experiences. Now we're going to move on to the sixth presentation. It's titled Equity in Clinical Trial Partnerships, a review of international research ethics, guidance, and guidelines. And our presenter is Farirai from Johns Hopkins Beeman Institute of Bioethics. Over to you, Fari.
It's always hard to be the last speaker, in a session. I'll try to make the standard that have been set so far. I think we can start. So, yeah, good afternoon. So my name is Farah Mtenerwa, and I'm with the Beeman Institute of Bioethics as a postdoctoral fellow. And I'm going to be sharing here some work that we did as looking into equity in clinical trial, guidelines, how equity is addressed in those documents. So as you listen to this conversation that we're going to be having, I want you to imagine being part of a clinical trial, or you've been invited as a community to participate in a clinical trial, only to be told halfway, or you realize that all of a sudden the trial has been stopped, right? So it's something that I really want to you to imagine. So as you might be aware, for years, clinical trials really in low-to-income countries have largely mirrored the priorities of high-income country nations, often leaving the priorities of the local communities really unmet. So global frameworks have really existed to guide these trials, but I think the question that we have to look into is how much do these actually make some significant changes? It is really against this backdrop that we analyze some documents, 9 documents, which looks into how equity is actually addressed. And our goal was to see how equity in clinical trial partnerships is actually addressed in those documents. And then I'll highlight the findings here. One of the key findings is that all the documents that we reviewed actually mentioned responsibility for researchers and research institutions, the responsibility that if they actually fulfilled, they could actually promote fair partnerships. But none really actually talk about a definition. So we don't have really a universal definition or a framework for looking into equity. Another second observation is that some of the guidelines were actually developed with limited geographic diversity. The perspectives of low to medium income countries had actually minimum representation, and then as a result, it's very difficult to actually have the recommendations that can actually apply to those settings. One other issue that we also realized was that there is no clear guidance on how to measure equity in clinical trial partnerships, who oversees it, or what enforcement mechanism actually exists. Equity cannot be achieved through statements alone, and without those metrics, it's also very difficult to talk about accountability. We also identified 5 independent themes. Each one reinforces the other, and together they do outline what equitable clinical trial partnerships should prioritize and look like in practice. So the ethics guidance, The ethics guidance we reviewed emphasized 4 priorities. They basically look into preventing exploitation, ensuring research benefits in local communities, promoting fair inclusion, and also guaranteeing post-trial access to interventions that are developed through local participation. I should also highlight that most of these guidelines actually emphasize on partnership activities and procedures, which is one of the themes that I have also spoken about. But they also do overlook deep structural factors, for example, funding patterns or even governance systems and also power imbalances. I think you might agree with me that these underlying determinants also shape how partnerships function and whether equity is truly achievable. Our study suggests quite a number of issues that can also be looked into. For example, the priority should also be on strengthening and improving existing guidelines that we already have. I'm sure this approach can also promote consistency, avoid duplication, and also enhances the effectiveness of current frameworks. Principles alone, I'm sure you will agree with me, they are not enough. They must be turned into practical tools that fit local context and also work for diverse stakeholders. Building these mechanisms actually requires clear concepts as well as real-world evidence to ensure that they're effective in practice. So the practical solution that we can also suggest is the establishment of independent oversight committees, and I'm sure these bodies can perhaps consider looking into monitoring the equity practices and also develop guidance that can also be used for developing, such tools. And they can also be used to resolve even disputes. I think an important step which can also be considered is actually to bring together, like in this meeting, different stakeholders, trialists, funders, regulators, ethicists, as well as members of the community, so that they can also agree on a best practice framework and a roadmap for equitable clinical trial partnerships. I think the World Health Organization is well positioned to lead this global effort. Just to highlight that maybe as my last point, equity isn't really optional. It reflects our integrity and it must be woven into every step. The questions that we ask, the contracts that we sign, the budgets we plan, the data we collect, and the care we provide. That's how these principles can actually become a reality. And I want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fari, for sharing with us on this interesting subject. So these are all the presenters that we had. Let me take this opportunity to thank our 6 presenters, Ivan, Ahmed, David, Munira, Feng, and Farirai. A big hand of applause to our 6 presenters.